Chapter 1: The Scent of Shame. The mud in the training pits did not smell like earth. It reeked of copper and old fear. Nyra scrubbed the hard-packed dirt, her fingers raw against the stone basin, red water swirling around her wrists. Every scrub was a penance for a crime she couldn't name but felt in the marrow of her bones. The sun beat down on the back of her neck, a heavy, suffocating weight that matched the silence of her wolf. Most shifters found joy in the training grounds. For them, this place meant power, glory, and the thrill of the hunt. For Nyra, it was just another stain she had to wash away. She kept her head down. Always down. If she looked at the ground, maybe the world would forget she occupied space above it. "Smells like the runt is at it again." The voice cut through the humid afternoon air, sharp and mocking. Nyra didn't flinch. Flinching invited the chase. She simply scrubbed harder, the rough bristles of the brush tearing at her skin. 3 young males from the beta line loitered near the gate. They hadn't shifted yet, but the arrogance of their bloodline already saturated their pores. One of them, a boy with sandy hair and cruel eyes, kicked a spray of gravel toward her. The stones stung her cheek. "Hey! Omega!" He laughed, the sound grating against her sensitive hearing. "You missed a spot. Or is that just your own scent?" Laughter erupted around him. A low, ugly sound. Nyra's stomach twisted. She wanted to scream. She wanted to stand up and bare teeth she didn't have, to tell them that her blood was just as red as theirs. But survival was a game of silence. Speak, and you are prey. Stay quiet, and you might just be ignored. She dipped the brush back into the bloody water. The metallic tang filled her nose, drowning out the scent of pine and freedom that wafted from the distant forest. "Leave it," another boy muttered, sounding bored. "She's not worth the energy." Like kicking a dead thing. Not worth the energy. The words settled on her shoulders, heavier than the water buckets. They were right. She was the mistake of the moon, the girl with the silent wolf and the eyes that saw too much. Being invisible was her only defense, yet even that felt like a failing today. Suddenly, the wind shifted. The birds in the nearby canopy went silent. The jeering boys stiffened, their playful malice evaporating into sudden, rigid terror. A deep, mournful horn blast shattered the afternoon. It wasn't the warning siren for rogue attacks. This sound was deeper, vibrating through the soles of Nyra's worn boots. It was the king's horn. The Lycan King. Here. Panic flared in her chest, cold and sharp. The boys at the gate scrambled back, tripping over themselves to look presentable, their mockery forgotten in the face of true power. A pack messenger, breathless and pale, sprinted into the training yard. He didn't look at the warriors. He pointed a trembling finger straight at the cleaning crews. "You," the messenger barked, his eyes scanning the lineup of Omegas before landing on Nyra. "The council chamber needs to be pristine. Now." The king arrives before sundown. Nyra's breath hitched. The council chamber was forbidden to her kind unless they were being sentenced. To go there now, with the air thick with impending judgment, felt like walking into a trap. But the command was absolute. She dropped the brush. The bloody water rippled, distorting her reflection until she looked like a monster. Or a ghost. Chapter 2: Echoes of the Unwanted. The council chamber was a cavern of polished mahogany and ancient stone. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light slicing through the high windows, suspended in the unnatural stillness. It was quiet here. Too quiet. The kind of silence that happens before a storm breaks the sky apart. Nyra moved like a shadow across the floor. Her rag dipped into the bucket of lemon oil, the sharp citrus scent warring with the musty odor of old laws and older prejudices. She polished the long table, her reflection staring back at her from the dark wood, hollow eyes, pale skin, a mouth pressed into a permanent line of resignation. She was supposed to be quick. In and out. Unseen. But the heavy oak doors at the far end of the hall were not as thick as the elders believed. Voices drifted from the antechamber. Low. Serious. The sound of men who decided the fate of others between sips of brandy. "The king does not travel for pleasantries," a rasping voice muttered. Elder Grayson. Nyra knew that tone. It was the sound of a man clutching power that was slipping through his fingers like dry sand. "If he finds the pack weak, he will cull us." "We are not weak," another voice argued, though it lacked conviction. "Our numbers are strong. Our borders secure. And our bloodline?" Grayson countered, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "What of the defects? The moon's errors?" Nyra's hand froze on the table. The rag dripped oil onto the pristine surface. She stopped breathing. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a trapped bird desperate for the sky. "The girl," the second voice said. "The one with the dormant wolf. She is a blight, Grayson. A symbol of our failing favor with the goddess. If the king sees her, he won't." Grayson sounded cruel now. "Absolute. She is a mistake the moon forgot to erase. We will keep her hidden in the scullery. Or perhaps, it is time we corrected the mistake ourselves." Cold horror washed over her. It wasn't just insults anymore. It wasn't just being the runt or the omega. They were talking about erasure. She was a stain they wanted to scrub out. Nyra gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. The belief she had nursed for years, that if she stayed small enough, they would let her live, crumbled into dust. They didn't want her small. They wanted her gone. Why? The question burned in her throat. What did I do but exist? She turned to flee. She had to get out. She had to disappear into the woods, run until her lungs burned and her feet bled. Anywhere was better than this room where her death was being discussed like a budget adjustment. She took a step toward the servants' entrance. The main doors groaned. The sound was massive, the screech of heavy iron hinges protesting against movement. The voices in the antechamber cut off instantly. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with static electricity that made the hair on Nyra's arms stand up. It wasn't the elders. The atmosphere shifted from stale bureaucracy to something ancient. Predatory. Nyra couldn't move. Her feet were nailed to the floorboards. Instinct screamed at her to drop to her knees, to bare her neck, to submit to the apex predator flooding the space with his presence. The doors swung wide open. Chapter 3: The Storm Arrives. Power did not walk into the room, it crashed in like a tidal wave. Nyra gasped, the air sucked from her lungs by the sheer weight of the presence that filled the chamber. It tasted of ozone. Of rain lashing against granite. Of deep, untouched forests where no sunlight reached the ground. Men in dark tactical gear flanked the entrance, their movements precise and lethal, but Nyra didn't see them. She couldn't see them. Her vision tunneled, the edges of the world blurring into gray static until only one figure remained in sharp, terrifying focus. He was massive. That was her first coherent thought. He took up space in a way that felt arrogant, his shoulders broad enough to carry the collapse of empires. He wore black, stark against the opulent warmth of the council room, a void that absorbed the light. Kael. The Lycan King. He didn't scan the room. He didn't look at the grand table or the banners of her pack hanging from the rafters. He stopped just past the threshold, his body going unnaturally still. Nyra trembled. She backed away, step by agonizing step, pressing herself against the cold stone wall as if she could merge with the masonry. "Don't look at me. Please. Just be a shadow." But the air around her was heating up. A fever prickled under her skin, starting at the base of her spine and racing upward. It wasn't fear. Fear was cold. This was molten lead pouring through her veins, a sensation so intense it bordered on agony. The king turned his head. The movement was slow, deliberate. A predator scenting the wind. His eyes locked onto hers. Golden. Not the yellow of a common wolf, but the burning, molten gold of a sun going supernova. The impact was physical. Nyra actually stumbled, her hand flying to her chest as a shockwave rattled her teeth. The tray she had been holding clattered to the floor, the sound exploding like a gunshot in the silence. She expected anger. She expected him to command the guards to remove the clumsy servant. He didn't blink. The connection between them snapped taut, a steel cable pulled to its breaking point. For a second, the room vanished. The elders, the messenger, the threat of death, all of it dissolved. There was only the gold of his irises and the terrified drumbeat of her own heart. Something inside her, something she thought had died years ago, stirred. A deep, low vibration in her chest. A call. Kael took a step toward her. The guards shifted nervously, confused by their king's deviation, but he ignored them. He ignored everything. His focus was a laser, burning through her defenses, stripping away the invisibility she had worn like armor for so long. He looked at her not as a mistake. Not as a stain. He looked at her as if he had been searching for something for 1,000 years, and he had just found it in the corner of a dusty room. Nyra couldn't breathe. She couldn't look away. He stopped 3 feet from her. The heat radiating off him was intoxicating, smelling of storm and spice. He towered over her, blocking out the light, becoming her entire world. His jaw tightened. A muscle feathered in his cheek. He inhaled deeply, dragging her scent into his lungs, his eyes darkening with a raw, terrifying hunger. He spoke one word, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards and settled deep in her womb. You. Chapter 4, The Mark of Ruin. Nyra scrubbed her skin until it burned. The water in the basin turned pink, tainted by the blood she had forced from her own pores in a desperate attempt to wash away the sensation of him. But the king's gaze was not something that washed off. It had stained her. It clung to the back of her neck like a fever. She stood in the cramped servants' quarters, shivering despite the humid heat of the night. The encounter in the council chamber played on a loop in her mind. His eyes. That single word. You. It felt like an accusation. Sudden agony speared through her right shoulder. Nyra gasped, a sharp, ragged intake of breath that tasted of iron. She gripped the edge of the basin, her knuckles turning skeletal white. It wasn't a muscle cramp. This was fire. It felt as though an invisible brand was being pressed into her flesh, searing through skin and muscle down to the bone. She collapsed to her knees. A scream clawed at her throat, but she bit her lip until it bled, silencing the sound. To scream was to be found. To be found was to die. The heat intensified. It pulsed in time with her heart, a rhythmic, blinding torture. Nyra tore the fabric of her rough tunic, exposing her shoulder to the cool air. She stared in horror. Silver light leaked from her skin. It wasn't a bruise or a cut. Lines were knitting themselves together on her flesh, glowing with a terrifying luminescence. They twisted and curled, forming a sigil she had seen only in the forbidden texts the elders kept locked away. A crescent moon bisected by a jagged lightning bolt. The summoning mark. Fate was not kind. Fate was a cruel executioner. The moon goddess had not ignored her, she had marked her for sacrifice. This mark did not mean power. It meant she belonged to the darkness now. The door to her quarters burst open. Wood splintered. The lock gave way with a screech of surrendering metal. Nyra scrambled backward, trying to cover the glowing brand with her tattered shirt, but the light was too bright. It cast long, dancing shadows against the peeling walls. Elder Grayson stood in the doorway. His face was a mask of twisted fury. Behind him, the pack guards crowded the hallway, their weapons drawn. "I knew it," Grayson spat. His voice was venom. "I smelled the change in the air the moment he looked at you." He stepped into the room. The space instantly felt too small. He looked down at her, not with pity, but with the cold calculation of a man deciding how to dispose of waste. "The king's curse has found a new vessel," Grayson declared to the guards. "Seize her. We must present the offering before the law binds our hands." Nyra scrambled for the corner, pressing her back against the rough plaster. "No. I didn't ask for this." "The victim never asks for the altar," Grayson sneered. He signaled the guards. "Take her. If she speaks, break her jaw." Rough hands grabbed her arms. They hauled her up, her feet dragging against the floorboards. The pain in her shoulder flared again, a warning. A beacon. The mark pulsed brighter, illuminating the fear in the guards' eyes. They weren't just holding a prisoner. They were holding a bomb. Chapter 5, Property of the Crown. The courtyard was suffocating. Hundreds of pack members stood in a silent ring, their faces illuminated by the flickering torches that lined the perimeter. They looked at Nyra with a mixture of revulsion and hunger. To them, she was no longer a pack member. She was a spectacle. Grayson shoved her forward. She stumbled, her knees scraping against the gravel, falling to the center of the circle. The humiliation burned hotter than the mark on her shoulder. "Behold!" Grayson's voice boomed, theatrical and pious. "The moon has cast her judgment. The Omega has been marked by the ancients." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Cursed. Broken. Sacrifice." Nyra kept her head bowed. Tears stung her eyes, hot and angry, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give them the satisfaction of her salt water. "By the laws of the first pack," Grayson continued, raising a knife that glinted wickedly in the torchlight, "a wolf who cannot shift, yet bears the mark, is an abomination. We must sever the connection before it taints the king." He was going to kill her. Right here. Under the guise of mercy. Nyra tensed. She prepared to fight, even if it was hopeless. Even if she was weak. She would not die on her knees. "Stop." The command was not shouted. It was spoken with the quiet, terrifying indifference of a natural disaster. The silence that followed was absolute. Kael stepped out of the shadows of the Alpha's lodge. He moved without sound, yet the ground seemed to tremble beneath his boots. He wore no armor, no crown, only a black shirt that strained against the width of his chest. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at Grayson. He looked only at her. Grayson faltered, the knife lowering an inch. "My king. She is defective. The mark is mine," Kael finished. He walked into the circle. The crowd parted like water retreating from a shark. He stopped beside Nyra, his presence a physical shield against the night air. He reached down. He didn't grab her. He offered a hand. Nyra stared at the open palm. It was calloused. Scarred. A warrior's hand. "Stand up," he said. His voice was low, for her ears alone. Nyra hesitated. Trust was a foreign language she had never learned to speak. But the alternative was Grayson's knife. She placed her trembling hand in his. His grip was iron. He pulled her to her feet with effortless strength, pulling her into the orbit of his body heat. The scent of him, rain and ozone, flooded her senses, drowning out the smell of the torch smoke. Kael turned to Grayson. His eyes flashed gold, the wolf surfacing. "You speak of laws," Kael said, his voice rolling like thunder. "Cite the law that allows you to slaughter what belongs to the throne." Grayson paled. "She is an Omega, sire." A runt. "She will weaken you." "She is under my protection," Kael declared. He swept his gaze over the cowering pack. "Touch her, and you touch me. Bleed her, and I will burn this territory until nothing but ash remains." The threat hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Kael looked down at Nyra. His expression was unreadable, hard and cold as a statue. He released her hand, but the warmth lingered on her skin. "Get in the car," he ordered. It wasn't an invitation. It was a sentence. She had been saved from the executioner only to be handed to the warden. Chapter 6, The First Rule. The interior of the armored SUV was a silent tomb. Nyra sat pressed against the cold leather of the passenger door, putting as much distance between herself and the king as the confined space allowed. The landscape blurred past the tinted windows, trees becoming smears of black ink against a charcoal sky. Every mile put distance between her and the only home she had ever known. A home that hated her, yes, but a home she understood. Now she was heading into the unknown. The Lycan King's fortress. A place of legends and nightmares. Kael sat on the other side of the bench seat. He had not spoken since they left the Packlands. He stared straight ahead, his profile cut from granite, his hands resting loosely on his thighs. He seemed relaxed, but Nyra knew better. The air around him vibrated with tension. He was a coiled spring. Why had he saved her? The question gnawed at her. Kings did not save runts. Kings did not threaten to burn down territories for a girl who scrubbed floors. "Stop thinking so loud," Kael said. Nyra jumped. She turned to look at him, but he still hadn't moved. I didn't say anything." "You didn't have to," he replied. "Your scent changed. You smell like anxiety and questions." "I have the right to ask," Nyra said, a spark of defiance flaring in her chest. "You took me. You claimed me. Why?" Kael finally turned. In the shadows of the car, his eyes seemed to glow with their own internal light. He looked tired. Not physically exhausted, but weary in a way that spoke of centuries. "Because the mark binds us," he said simply. "Because if I left you there, Grayson would have carved it out of your skin while you were still breathing." The bluntness of the statement robbed her of breath. "So I am a prisoner?" "You are a complication," Kael corrected. "You are a liability that I must manage." The word stung. Liability. It was just a fancy word for burden. She was still the unwanted thing, just in a more expensive cage. The car began to slow. Ahead, massive iron gates loomed out of the mist, guarding a fortress of black stone that rose from the mountain like a jagged tooth. Kael leaned forward. He invaded her personal space, his face inches from hers. The scent of him was overwhelming now, intoxicating and terrifying all at once. His gaze dropped to her lips, then snapped back to her eyes. Listen to me closely, Nyra, he said. His voice was rough, like gravel grinding together. You will live in my house. You will eat my food. You will be safe under my roof. He paused. His pupils dilated, swallowing the gold. But do not mistake protection for affection. He reached out. His thumb brushed her cheek, a touch so light it felt like a phantom. Nyra's breath hitched. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Do not look at me with those eyes, he whispered, the command warring with a desperate edge in his tone. And whatever you do, do not fall in love with me. He pulled away before she could answer. The car stopped. Because I will destroy you, he finished. The lock clicked open. Kael shoved the door open and stepped out into the cold mountain air, leaving Nyra alone in the dark, his warning ringing in her ears like a death knell. Chapter 7, The Fortress of Ghosts. The Fortress of Black Iron did not welcome guests. It tolerated them like a stone tolerates moss. Nyra walked the perimeter of the grand library, her fingers trailing over spines of books she would never be allowed to read. The air here was thin. Cold. It tasted of high altitude and ancient dust. 3 days had passed since Kael dragged her from the execution circle, yet she felt more like a prisoner now than she ever had in the mud pits. Silence was the rule here. The servants moved like wraiths, gliding over the marble floors without sound, their eyes fixed on the ground. They knew what she was. The Omega. The stain on the king's floor. A heavy hand clamped onto her shoulder. Nyra spun around. The head of the household staff, a woman with graying hair and a face carved from granite, glared down at her. You are not permitted in the West Wing, the woman hissed. Her grip tightened, nails digging into Nyra's bruised skin. The king's quarters are beyond those doors. Creatures like you do not breathe the same air as him. I was lost, Nyra said, her voice steady despite the rapid hammering of her heart. The corridors all look the same. Liar. The woman shoved her backward. Nyra stumbled, catching herself against a pedestal. A porcelain vase wobbled, threatening to shatter. You are looking for him. You think because he saved your pathetic life, you have the right to warm his bed? You are nothing. A distraction he will discard when the season turns. Nyra straightened her tunic. I never asked to be here. Then leave, the housekeeper sneered. Jump from the parapet. Save us the trouble of burying you when the curse finally takes its toll. The curse. That word again. It followed her like a shadow. Before Nyra could respond, the temperature in the hallway plummeted. The shadows stretched, growing long and sharp. Kael stood at the end of the corridor. He wore training leathers, sweat glistening on his collarbone. He did not look at the housekeeper. He looked at the hand that had shoved Nyra. Is there a problem, Martha? His voice was soft. Deadly. It was the sound of a tectonic plate shifting before an earthquake. The housekeeper turned pale. She bowed low, trembling. No, my king. I was merely instructing the girl on the boundaries. She wandered too close to your private sanctuary. Kael walked forward. His boots made heavy, rhythmic thuds against the stone. He stopped in front of Nyra, ignoring the bowing woman entirely. He leaned in, inhaling deeply near the curve of Nyra's neck. The housekeeper gasped. She does not smell like a distraction, Kael murmured, his eyes flashing with that molten, terrifying gold. She smells like the only thing in this castle that is alive. He turned his gaze to the servant. Do not touch her again. If she wanders, let her wander. If she enters my room, it is because I allowed the door to be open. Martha fled. She didn't walk, she scurried away like a rat caught in the light. Nyra looked up at him, confused by the sudden defense. You told me I was a liability. You are, Kael agreed. He stepped back, the warmth of his body vanishing, leaving her cold. But you are my liability. And I do not like other people touching my things. Chapter 8, Blood on the Marble. Thunder rattled the window panes. Nyra could not sleep. The storm outside mirrored the chaos inside her head. The fortress was asleep, wrapped in the heavy velvet of midnight, but she was wide awake, pacing the small room she had been assigned. A crash echoed from the hallway. It was the sound of something heavy hitting the floor. Then a groan. A low, guttural sound of pain that made the hair on her arms stand up. She opened her door. The corridor was dark, lit only by the occasional flash of lightning through the arrow slits. A trail of dark droplets marred the pristine gray stone. Blood. Nyra followed it. Instinct moved her feet before her brain could protest. The trail led to the heavy oak double doors at the end of the hall. The king's chambers. The door was ajar. Kael was slumped against the foot of his massive bed. He had stripped off his shirt, revealing a torso that looked like a map of violence. Scars crisscrossed his skin, ancient stories written in white ridges. But there was a new wound tonight. A deep gash tore across his ribs. It wasn't healing. The edges of the wound sizzled, black and angry. Silver, Nyra whispered. Kael's head snapped up. His eyes were glazed, fever bright. Get out. You're hurt. She stepped into the room. The smell of burnt flesh and ozone was overpowering. That's rogue silver. It's poisoned. If you don't clean it, it will rot the muscle. I said get out. He tried to stand, but his legs buckled. He snarled, a sound more animal than man, clutching his side. Nyra ignored the command. She ran to the basin on the vanity, tearing the hem of her nightshift to create a bandage. She grabbed a bottle of clear alcohol from the table. She knelt beside him. Hold still. Don't touch me, he rasped, his hand shooting out to grab her wrist. His grip was crushing. Nyra, listen to me. If you touch me now, the bond. Let the bond do what it wants, she said, her voice shaking but firm. I'm not letting you die. She poured the alcohol over the wound. Kael roared. His back arched, muscles pulling taut as steel cables. But he didn't let go of her wrist. Instead, he pulled her closer. Nyra pressed the cloth against the bleeding gash. Her fingers brushed his skin. The reaction was instantaneous. A shockwave blasted through the room, shattering the glass of the bedside lamp. It wasn't just electricity, it was a connection so deep it felt like her soul was being hooked and dragged out of her body. Kael stopped fighting the pain. He stared at her, his pupils blowing wide, swallowing the gold. The agony on his face shifted into something else. Something ravenous. He leaned in. His forehead rested against hers. He was burning up, his skin radiating heat like a furnace. You have no idea what you are doing, he whispered. You are waking the monster. Maybe the monster needs to wake up, she replied, refusing to break his gaze. For a second, she thought he would kiss her. The air between them crackled, heavy with unsaid things. Then he shoved her away. He scrambled back, putting distance between them, breathing hard as if he had just run a marathon. Leave, he commanded. His voice was broken. Before I lose the will to let you go. Chapter 9, The Whisper of the Curse. The great hall was a theater of lies. Dinner was a formal affair tonight. Council members from neighboring territories had arrived to discuss border treaties, which was polite code for spying on the king's weakness. Nyra stood by the wall, dressed in the simple gray uniform of a servant, though she served no one. Kael had insisted she attend. He wanted her in plain sight where he could see her. She felt the eyes of the council upon her. They looked at her like vultures eyeing a dying deer. "Is this her?" The voice belonged to Alpha Thorn, a man with a thick neck and eyes that held zero kindness. He swirled his wine, gesturing toward Nyra with his goblet. "The one Grayson marked for death. The mute little thing." "She speaks," Kael said from the head of the table. He didn't look up from his meal, but the knife in his hand cut into the steak with unnecessary force. "Watch your tone, Thorn." "I meant no offense, King," Thorn chuckled, a wet, oily sound. "It's just strange. You keep a defective Omega as a pet. Rumor has it she hasn't even shifted." Laughter rippled around the table. Nyra kept her face blank. She was used to this. Insults were just noise. "Perhaps she needs motivation," Thorn suggested. He stood up, swaying slightly. "A little fear usually forces the wolf out." He grabbed a heavy silver candelabra from the table and hurled it. It wasn't aimed at her head. It was aimed at her feet. Nyra flinched, jumping back as the heavy metal crashed into the stone floor inches from her toes. Hot wax splattered onto her shoes. The room went silent. Kael was moving before the candelabra hit the ground. He crossed the distance in a blur of motion that the human eye couldn't track. One moment he was seated, the next, he had Thorn pinned against the stone wall. Kael's hand was wrapped around the Alpha's throat, lifting him a foot off the ground. "She is not a pet," Kael snarled. The sound wasn't human. It was the roar of a beast that had snapped its chains. "She is under my protection. You throw scraps at her, and I will tear your arm off and feed it to you." Thorn clawed at Kael's hand, his face turning purple. "Mercy, King!" Kael threw him. Thorn skidded across the floor, crashing into the table, sending plates and goblets flying. "Everyone out," Kael ordered. The room cleared in seconds. Dignitaries and servants fled, terrified of the violence radiating from their monarch. Nyra stood alone in the wreckage. Kael turned to her. His chest heaved. He looked terrifying. "Beautiful. Are you hurt?" he asked. "No." He walked toward her. He reached out, brushing a stray hair from her forehead. His hand trembled. "They will keep coming," he said. "They smell blood." "Why?" Nyra asked. "Why do they care so much about me?" Kael looked past her, staring into the dark corners of the hall. "Because they know the history," he said softly. "They know what happens to the women I choose." "What happens?" He looked at her, and the sorrow in his eyes was bottomless. "They die, Nyra. Every single one of them. The bond is too strong for a normal soul to bear. It burns them out from the inside until there is nothing left but ash." He stepped back, the truth hanging between them like a guillotine blade. "That is the curse," he whispered. "I am not protecting you from them. I am protecting you from me." Chapter 10, The Garden of Stone. The crypts beneath the fortress did not smell of rot. They smelled of preserved grief. Nyra walked down the long, spiraling staircase of black basalt, her hand trailing along the cold wall. Kael had told her the truth about the curse, but words were just wind. She needed to see the cost. She needed to touch the reality of what loving the Lycan King meant. The chamber opened up into a vast, circular mausoleum. The ceiling was lost in shadows, but the floor was illuminated by a soft, bioluminescent moss that grew in the grout between the stones. Statues. Dozens of them. They stood in alcoves lining the walls. Beautiful women carved from white marble, their faces frozen in expressions of eternal youth. Nyra approached the nearest one. The plaque at the base was tarnished silver. Queen Ilera. Claimed by the fire. Age 22. Nyra moved to the next. Queen Seraphina. Consumed by the bond. Age 19. She walked faster. The names blurred. The ages were all the same. Young. Vibrant. Dead. They weren't just wives, they were fuel. The king's power was a furnace, and these women had been the wood thrown into the fire to keep the realm warm. I told you not to come down here. The voice echoed off the vaulted ceiling. Nyra didn't turn. She knew Kael was there. She could feel him in the sudden spike of her pulse, and the way the air in the crypt became heavier, charged with static. I needed to see them, Nyra said. Her voice sounded small in the cavernous space. I needed to see my future. Kael stepped into the ring of light. He looked like a ghost himself, his face pale, his eyes dark pits of exhaustion. He stopped before the statue of Seraphina, his hand hovering over the stone hand of the dead queen but not touching it. This is not your future, he said roughly. Because I will not claim you. I will not add your statue to this hall. You can't stop the bond, Nyra argued. She turned to face him, anger flaring bright and hot in her chest. It's already there. I feel it. Every time you look at me, it pulls. Every time you bleed, I hurt. You can deny it, Kael, but you can't kill it. Kael closed the distance between them. He grabbed her shoulders, his grip desperate. I can starve it, he swore. I will never touch you. I will never mark you. You will live here, safe and hated, until you die of old age in a warm bed. That is the only mercy I can give you. Nyra looked up at him. She saw the torture in his eyes. He wanted her. The hunger was there, raw and terrifying, a beast pacing behind the bars of his restraint. He was starving himself to keep her alive. And if I don't want that, she challenged. If I don't want to be a pet kept in a glass jar? Then you are a fool, Kael growled. He released her, turning his back as if looking at her hurt him physically. Look around you, Nyra. Love does not save people in this family. It eats them. He walked away, vanishing into the shadows of the staircase. Nyra stayed. She looked back at the stone face of Seraphina. The statue seemed to mock her. Run, the stone lips seemed to say. Run while you still have blood to bleed. But Nyra didn't run. She placed her hand on her own chest, feeling the frantic rhythm of her heart. It wasn't beating with fear anymore. It was beating with a question. Why did she feel so alive in a room full of death? Chapter 11, The Chain Breaker. The library was a labyrinth of dust and forgotten history. Nyra sat at a heavy oak table, surrounded by stacks of leather-bound tomes. She had been searching for hours, driven by an instinct she couldn't explain. The encounter in the crypt had shifted something inside her. Kael spoke of the bond as a death sentence, a fire that consumed the vessel. But Nyra didn't feel like she was burning. She felt like she was filling up. Since the moment Kael looked at her, the emptiness that had defined her existence as an omega began to recede. It was being replaced by a pressure. A hum. It felt like standing next to a high-voltage wire. She opened a book titled The Anatomy of the Soul Bond. The pages were brittle, flaking under her fingertips. The bond amplifies the inherent nature of the mate, the text read. It pours power into the vessel. If the vessel is cracked or weak, it shatters. Nyra frowned. Everyone said she was weak. An omega. A runt with a silent wolf. If that were true, the proximity to Kael should have killed her by now. The sheer voltage of his aura should have stopped her heart. But it hadn't. It made her stronger. She closed her eyes. She turned her focus inward, past the fear, past the trauma of the mud pits, searching for the wolf that had never answered her call. Usually, she found only silence. A dark, empty room. Today, the room wasn't empty. There was a light shining under the door. The bond with Kael was feeding her. It was a golden thread of energy, bypassing her physical body and flowing straight into her core. Nyra mentally pushed against the darkness. She reached for the source of that silence. She hit a wall. It wasn't a natural absence. It was a barrier. Nyra gasped, her eyes flying open in the silent library. She hadn't felt emptiness. She had felt a shield. She focused again, harder this time. She visualized the barrier. It was black, slick like oil, and covered in jagged, ancient runes. It wrapped around her wolf like a cage. This wasn't a birth defect. Nature didn't make straight lines. Nature didn't write runes. Someone had put this here. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She stood up, the chair scraping loud and harsh against the floor. She wasn't an omega. Omegas didn't need to be caged. You didn't lock up a kitten in a vault designed for a dragon. You only bound things that were dangerous. You only bound things that threatened the established order. Her hands trembled. All the years of abuse. The mockery. The spit on her face. It was all a lie. They hadn't hated her because she was weak. They had hated her because they were terrified of what she would become if she ever woke up. You found it. The whisper came from the shadows between the bookshelves. Nyra spun around. A figure stood there, cloaked in the gray robes of the archivists. But the face under the hood wasn't a scholar's. It was scarred, the eyes milky white with blindness. "Who are you?" Nyra demanded. Her voice didn't shake. "A witness," the blind man rasped. He stepped forward, leaning on a crooked staff. "I saw them do it. The night you were born. The council elders. Grayson. They saw the golden call on your skin. The mark of an apex. Apex." The word hung in the air, heavy and electric. "They couldn't kill you," the old man continued. "The laws of magic forbade spilling the blood of a newborn apex. So they bound you. They locked your wolf away and threw away the key. They made you a runt to hide their own inadequacy." Nyra looked down at her hands. They looked the same, but they felt different. They felt like weapons. "How do I break it?" she asked. The old man smiled, a toothless, grim expression. "You don't break a seal like that with a spell, girl. You break it with a surge. You need a power source greater than the one that created it." He pointed a gnarled finger toward the ceiling, toward where the king would be. "You need the storm." Chapter 12, The Assassin's Shadow. Rain lashed against the glass doors of Nyra's balcony. The storm had broken over the mountain, turning the world outside into a chaotic smear of gray and black. Inside, the fire in the hearth had died down to embers. Nyra paced. The revelation in the library had rewired her entire nervous system. She wasn't defective. She was suppressed. The anger that boiled in her gut was a living thing, hot and venomous. She wanted to scream. She wanted to find Grayson and tear the truth out of his throat. She stopped. A draft. The balcony doors were closed. The windows were latched. Yet the candle on her bedside table flickered. Someone was in the room. Nyra didn't turn around. She didn't gasp. The survival instincts she had honed in the mud pits took over, the ability to be still, to sense the shift in air pressure. "Don't make this difficult," a voice whispered from the darkness near the wardrobe. Nyra dropped to the floor just as the crossbow bolt slammed into the wall where her head had been a second ago. Wood splintered. The bolt vibrated with kinetic energy. She rolled, scrambling behind the heavy oak vanity. Another bolt thudded into the wood, punching through inches from her face. "The council sends its regards," the assassin sneered. Footsteps approached. Slow. Confident. The killer knew she was unarmed. He knew she was just an Omega. Nyra looked around for a weapon. Nothing. A hairbrush. A water pitcher. Useless against a trained killer. The assassin rounded the corner. He was dressed in black tactical gear, his face covered by a mask. He held a combat knife in his hand, the blade coated in a dark, viscous liquid. "Wolfsbane. Kael can't save you this time," he mocked, lunging forward. Nyra didn't think. She reacted. She threw her hand up, bracing for the impact of the blade. But she didn't just brace. She pulled. She reached for that golden thread, the bond that connected her to Kael. She grabbed it with her mind and yanked it violently toward her, channeling the king's power through her own blocked pathways. "Break!" she screamed internally. The air in the room exploded. A shockwave of pure force erupted from her palm. It slammed into the assassin's chest like a battering ram. He was thrown backward, flying across the room and smashing through the glass balcony doors. The storm roared in, wind and rain flooding the bedroom. Nyra stared at her hand. Smoke curled from her fingertips. She hadn't shifted. She hadn't transformed. She had used pure kinetic energy. The assassin groaned. He was tough. He dragged himself up from the shattered glass, blood pouring from his nose, his eyes wide with shock. "What are you?" he wheezed. Nyra stood up. She felt dizzy, drained, but also exhilarated. The crack in the seal was hairline, but it was there. "I am your reckoning," she said. The assassin raised his knife again, desperation replacing his arrogance. He charged. A blur of darkness tackled him from the side. Kael. He hit the assassin with the force of a freight train. There was a wet crunch of bone. The assassin didn't even have time to scream before Kael ripped his throat out. Silence fell, broken only by the howling wind and the wet sound of the body hitting the floor. Kael stood over the corpse, his chest heaving, his face splattered with blood that wasn't his. He turned to Nyra. His eyes were fully gold, no trace of humanity left. He looked at the shattered doors. He looked at the assassin. Then he looked at her. He didn't ask if she was okay. He knew. He could feel the power she had just discharged. It hung in the air, tasting of ozone and impossible things. "You used the bond," he said. It wasn't a question. "I had to," Nyra replied. She didn't back down. She didn't cower. Kael wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. He stepped over the body and walked to her, checking her for wounds with frantic, trembling hands. When he found no blood on her, he let out a breath that sounded like a sob. He turned back to the window, looking out at the storm, his rage radiating off him in waves hot enough to blister paint. "They sent a blade into my home," Kael said. His voice was calm. Terrifyingly calm. "They tried to cut out my heart." He looked back at her, and the promise in his eyes made the storm outside look like a gentle breeze. "War," he declared. "They want a monster? I will show them why the devil answers to me." Chapter 13, Iron and Bone. The training hall was a vault of silence and sweat. Nyra struck the heavy sandbag. Her knuckles split. Fresh blood bloomed, stark red against the gray canvas, but she did not stop. Pain was a teacher. Pain was the only thing that felt real in a world made of secrets and shadows. She visualized the black wall inside her mind. The seal. Every punch was a hammer blow against those ancient runes. She drew on the golden thread connecting her to Kael, siphoning his limitless energy to fuel her strikes. It was theft. It was survival. The bag swung violently with a final, cracking impact. Sand spilled from a tear in the leather, pooling on the floor like dry blood. Nyra gasped, leaning against the damp stone wall. Her lungs burned. The seal hadn't broken, but it had shuddered. She could feel the wolf behind it now, not sleeping, but pacing. Waiting. "Your form is sloppy." The voice came from the entrance, low and vibrating with disapproval. Kael stood there. He watched her with eyes that missed nothing. He had not slept since the assassin died. The tension in his shoulders was a tangible thing, a loaded weapon waiting for a target. Nyra wiped the sweat from her eyes. "I am learning. You are hurting yourself." Kael walked into the room. He moved with the predatory grace of a creature that ruled the food chain. "You are trying to force a river through a straw. If you pull too much of my power before your channels are ready, you will incinerate your own nervous system." "Better to burn out than fade away," she countered. He stopped in front of her. The air between them thickened, charged with the ozone scent of the bond. He reached out, taking her bruised hand in his. His thumb traced the split skin over her knuckles. "Is that what you think?" Kael asked softly. "That you are fading? You are the loudest thing in my kingdom, Nyra. You scream of potential." "Potential doesn't stop knives," she whispered. "Power does." Kael's jaw tightened. He released her hand and stepped back, shedding his jacket. The black fabric hit the floor with a heavy thud. "You want power?" He raised his hands, palms open, inviting an attack. "Come and take it. But do not expect me to go easy on you just because you bleed." Nyra didn't hesitate. She launched herself at him. It was a dance of violence. She was fast, fueled by the borrowed magic, but Kael was a mountain. He blocked her strikes without flinching. He turned her momentum against her, spinning her around, sweeping her legs. She hit the mat hard. Before she could scramble up, he was on her. He pinned her wrists above her head, his weight pressing her into the floor. Their chests heaved in unison. "Dead," Kael murmured. His face was inches from hers. "If I were an enemy, your throat would be gone." "You aren't an enemy," Nyra panted. She stared up at him, seeing the gold bleed into his irises. "I am the worst kind of enemy," he replied, his voice rough. "The kind you want to let in." Chapter 14, The Threshold of Ruin. The spar had shifted. It was no longer about combat. The adrenaline crashing through Nyra's veins turned into something hotter, darker. The friction of his body against hers wasn't a threat, it was a promise. Kael didn't move. He held her pinned, his grip on her wrists unyielding. The heat radiating from him was a physical weight, pressing her down, melting her resistance. Nyra arched her back. It was instinct. A plea. The bond snapped taut. A wave of euphoria crashed over them. It started in her chest and exploded outward, a golden light that she could see even with her eyes open. It was the feeling of coming home. It was the sensation of being whole for the first time in her life. Kael groaned. The sound was torn from his chest, a jagged noise of pure want. He lowered his head. His nose brushed along the sensitive line of her jaw, inhaling her scent as if it were the only oxygen left in the world. Nyra, he breathed against her skin. Do it, she whispered. Claim me. She wanted the bite. She wanted the permanence of it. If the seal was blocking her power, maybe the mating mark would shatter it completely. Maybe his teeth in her neck were the key. Kael's lips grazed the pulse point of her throat. His teeth scraped against her skin, sharp and ready. The bond roared, a deafening crescendo demanding completion. Nyra closed her eyes, surrendering. He froze. The heat vanished. Kael ripped himself away from her as if she had turned into white-hot iron. He scrambled back across the mats, slamming into the far wall. His chest heaved. He gripped his hair, his claws digging into his scalp, fighting a war within his own skull. No, he roared. The word shattered the intimacy of the room. Nyra sat up, cold and bereft. Kael? I almost did it, he gasped. He looked at her with wild, terrified eyes. I almost killed you. I am strong enough, she pleaded. I am an apex. The archivist said. The archivist deals in theory. Kael shouted. I deal in graves. Look at me, Nyra. Look at what I am. My soul is a black hole. If I mark you before that seal is fully broken, the feedback loop will stop your heart. I will feel you die in my arms. He stood up, his body shaking with the effort of denial. He pointed a trembling finger at the door. Go to your room. Lock the door. Do not come out until I can look at you without wanting to devour you. Nyra stood. Shame burned in her cheeks, hot and stinging. But beneath the shame was a horrible realization. He wasn't rejecting her because she was unworthy. He was rejecting her because he loved her enough to let her hate him. Chapter 15, The Black Scroll. Morning brought no sunlight. The sky was a bruise of purple and gray, heavy with unfallen snow. Nyra sat on the edge of her bed. She hadn't slept. The memory of Kael's weight on top of her, the almost bite, replayed in her mind like a fever dream. She touched her neck. It was smooth. Unmarked. Unclaimed. A horn blasted from the courtyard. It wasn't the king's horn. This sound was discordant, screeching like a dying bird. It was the sound of the High Council. Nyra walked to the balcony. The shattered glass had been swept away, but the wind still bit at her skin. Below, a procession of black-armored vehicles filled the driveway. Men in ceremonial robes, red as fresh arterial spray, stood in a formation that looked like a spear tip aimed at the fortress doors. Kael walked out to meet them. He wore his crown today. A jagged band of dark steel that looked heavy enough to break a man's neck. Grayson stood at the front of the council delegation. He held a scroll of black parchment sealed with white wax. Kaelin Drax, Grayson's voice was amplified by magic, booming against the stone walls. King of the Lycans. You harbor a fugitive. I harbor a guest, Kael's voice cut through the air, unamplified but twice as powerful. Speak your business and leave my land. Grayson unfurled the scroll. By the decree of the Prime Elders, Grayson read, his voice dripping with satisfaction. The female known as Nyra is hereby declared Malum Aeterna. An eternal threat. Nyra gripped the railing. Malum Aeterna. It was a designation reserved for demons. For soulless things that threatened the fabric of reality. She is an unregistered apex, Grayson continued. A unstable variable. The law states that any apex who has not manifested by their 18th year is a ticking bomb. She must be surrendered to the Council for neutralization. Neutralization, Kael repeated flatly. You mean execution. It is for the safety of the realm, Grayson smiled. If she breaks her seal uncontrolled, she could level a city. Give her to us, King. Or be declared a traitor to your own laws. Kael stepped forward. The ground beneath his boots cracked. If you want her, Kael said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried on the wind, you will have to climb over my corpse. Grayson's smile widened. It was a trap. He had wanted this. So be it, Grayson announced. The king has chosen the girl over the crown. The writ of challenge is issued. 3 days from now, at the lunar eclipse, the king will defend his claim in the arena of blood. If he loses, the girl dies. If he wins, she dies. He laughed. Because there is no surviving the arena, Kael. Not even for you. Chapter 16, The Anatomy of a Ghost. Nyra did not pack a bag. Bags were for travelers who intended to arrive somewhere. She was not traveling. She was erasing herself. The fortress was quiet, holding its breath before the coming war. Kael was in the war room, strategizing a defense for a battle he could not win. He was moving armies to protect one girl. It was madness. It was suicide. She slipped through the servants' entrance. The heavy iron door didn't creak. She had oiled the hinges herself an hour ago, her hand steady with the terrified resolve of someone who sees the edge of the cliff and decides to jump. The wind outside hit her like a physical slap. It carried the scent of snow and pine, but underneath lay the rot of the blood moon territory. That was where she would go. The lawless lands. The place where Omegas went to die quickly. If she was gone, the challenge was void. If she was dead, Kael remained king. Nyra ran. Her boots crunched against the frozen gravel. Every step took her further from the only warmth she had ever known. The bond in her chest screamed. It was a physical tether, yanking at her ribs, demanding she turn around. It felt like tearing stitches out of a fresh wound. She ignored the pain. Pain was familiar. Pain was safe. Love was the dangerous thing. Love was the blade at Kael's throat. The forest swallowed her. The trees here were twisted, their branches interlocking like skeletal fingers blocking out the sky. Shadows moved in the periphery. Rogues. Exiles. Creatures that had lost their humanity to the beast. Let them come. She pushed harder, her breath tearing at her throat. Her legs burned with lactic acid. The seal on her magic throbbed, heavy and suffocating, a lead weight dragging her down. She didn't try to draw on Kael's power this time. She severed the flow. She walled it off. He would feel it. He would feel the sudden silence in his head where her presence used to be. Forgive me, she whispered to the darkness. A howl rose in the distance. It wasn't Kael. It was jagged and hungry. The rogues had scented fresh prey. Nyra didn't slow down. She ran until her vision blurred. She ran until the fortress was just a memory of stone and regret. She was doing what she was born to do. She was becoming nothing. Chapter 17, The Graveyard of Stars. The Blood Moon territory lived up to its name. The ground here was red clay, sticky and wet, smelling of iron. Nyra collapsed near the roots of a dead oak tree. Her legs simply refused to take another step. Her lungs felt like they were filled with broken glass. She curled into a ball, pressing her face into the dirt. The cold seeped into her bones, numbing the ache in her muscles. It was over. She had run far enough. The rogues would find her soon. Or the cold would take her. It didn't matter which executioner arrived first. Above her, the clouds parted. The moon looked down, indifferent and pale. It wasn't the goddess watching over her children. It was a cold rock in the sky, witnessing the end of a mistake. Grayson was right. The boys in the mud pit were right. She was a stain. A glitch in the bloodline. She had thought, for a brief, beautiful moment, that Kael's eyes had changed that. She thought being chosen made her worthy. But worthiness wasn't a gift someone could give you. It was a structure you had to build yourself, and she had no bricks left. A twig snapped. Nyra didn't flinch. She didn't try to hide. She simply closed her eyes. "Make it quick," she murmured. Silence answered her. Not the silence of an empty forest. The silence of a predator who has cleared the area of all other threats. The birds had stopped singing. The wind had died. Even the crickets were mute. The air pressure dropped. It wasn't a rogue. Rogue smelled of decay and desperation. This scent was ozone. Storm. Rain on hot asphalt. Nyra's heart stopped, then hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She opened her eyes. He was there. Kael stood at the edge of the clearing. He wasn't wearing his crown. He wasn't wearing his armor. His shirt was torn, his chest heaving as if he had sprinted across the entire continent. He looked wild. Terrifying. He didn't look like a king. He looked like a man who had watched his world walk away. "You thought you could run," Kael said. His voice was wrecked. Hoarse. "You thought you could sever the bond and I wouldn't feel the exact moment my soul started to bleed." Nyra scrambled backward, pushing herself up against the tree bark. "Go back. You lose the challenge if you leave the circle. Go back and save your kingdom." "There is no kingdom without you," he roared. The sound shook the dead leaves from the branches. Chapter 18, The Crown in the Dust. He closed the distance between them. He moved with a violence that made Nyra flinch, but he didn't grab her. He stopped 3 feet away, vibrating with the effort of not touching her. His eyes were pure gold, the pupils blown wide, swallowing the iris. "You are the poison, Kael." Nyra screamed. Tears finally spilled, hot and angry tracks on her frozen cheeks. "Don't you see? I am the weakness they will use to break you. If I die, you live. It's simple math. It's the only choice." She reached into her boot and pulled out a shard of jagged rock she had picked up miles back. She held it out to him. "Do it," she commanded. Her hand shook. "End it. Prove you are a king. Prove you can make the hard choice." Kael looked at the rock. Then he looked at her face. The fury drained out of him, replaced by a devastation so profound it looked like physical agony. "You want me to prove I am a king?" he asked softly. "Yes. Kill the weakness." "Very well." Kael didn't reach for the rock. He sank down. Nyra gasped, the sound tearing from her throat. The rock slipped from her numb fingers, thudding into the soft clay. Kael, the Lycan King, the scourge of the north, the man who had never bowed to anyone in 300 years, fell to his knees in the mud before her. He lowered his head. He exposed the vulnerable column of his neck to her. It was the ultimate gesture of submission. The absolute surrender of power. "I choose the weakness," he whispered into the dirt. "I surrender the crown. I surrender the war. If the world says you are unworthy, then I will burn the world until it learns to speak your name with reverence." He looked up at her. There were tears in his golden eyes. "Do not ask me to live without you, Nyra. I am not that strong." The world tilted on its axis. Everything she believed about power, about worth, about hierarchy, shattered in that instant. He wasn't saving her because she was his fate. He was kneeling to her because she was his choice. Nyra fell to her knees in front of him. She reached out, her hands trembling, and cupped his face. "You fool," she sobbed. "You beautiful, idiotic fool." "Yours," he swore, pressing his forehead against hers. "I am yours. Even if we die tonight. Even if the sun never rises." The bond didn't just snap into place. It fused. The barrier in her mind, the seal the elders had placed, groaned under the weight of his absolute acceptance. It didn't break yet. But for the first time, the wolf inside her opened its eyes. And they were gold. Chapter 19, The Walk of Ash. The mud on Kael's knees was a stain against his royalty, yet he wore it like a declaration of war. He stood up. He pulled Nyra with him, his grip bruising, possessive, absolute. The forest around them felt different now. The shadows didn't look like monsters anymore. They looked like an audience waiting for the main act to begin. Nyra looked at her hands. They were caked in red clay and blood. 10 minutes ago, she had been ready to die to save him. Now, looking at the fierce devastation in his eyes, she realized that dying was the coward's way out. Living was the harder choice. Living meant fighting. "We go back," Kael said. His voice was no longer a jagged whisper. It was steel cooling after the forge. "They will kill us," Nyra replied. She didn't say it with fear. She said it as a fact, like stating the weather. "Let them try." Kael turned to face the direction of the fortress. "Grayson wants a show. He wants the king to bleed for his mistake. I intend to give him a tragedy he will never forget." He took off his signet ring. The heavy gold band, stamped with the crest of the Lycan monarchy, glinted in the moonlight. He took Nyra's hand. He slid the ring onto her thumb. It was too big, loose and heavy, but the symbolism hit her like a punch to the gut. "This is not a gift," Kael told her, his eyes burning into hers. "This is a target. When we walk into that arena, they will see this on your hand. They will know I am not protecting a subject. I am defending my queen." Nyra curled her fingers around the gold. It felt warm. It felt like a heartbeat. "I am not a queen," she said. "I am the girl who scrubs the floors." "You are whatever you decide to be when the blood starts flowing," Kael countered. He started walking. He didn't look back to see if she was following. He knew she was. The tether between them was solid now, a cable of white-hot energy that hummed with violence. They walked out of the blood moon territory. They walked past the border markers. They walked onto the main road leading to the fortress. Dawn broke over the mountains. The sky turned the color of a fresh bruise. Nyra didn't hide her face. She didn't hunch her shoulders. The fear that had defined her life was still there, but it had changed shape. It was no longer a cage. It was fuel. Chapter 20, The Theater of Wolves. The Arena of Blood was a stone coliseum carved into the base of the mountain. It was packed. Thousands of shifters filled the tiered seats. The noise was a physical wall, a roar of anticipation, cruelty, and bloodlust. They had come to watch an execution. They had come to see the fall of a king who dared to love a runt. Kael walked through the massive iron gates. Nyra walked beside him. The crowd went silent. It wasn't a respectful silence. It was the shock of seeing the impossible. The king was covered in mud. The girl looked like a wraith dug up from a grave. But they walked in step, their strides matching, their heads high. In the center of the arena stood Grayson. He was flanked by the High Council and a dozen executioners holding silver-tipped spears. "You returned," Grayson called out, his voice amplified by the acoustics of the stone pit. He smiled, a thin, reptilian stretching of lips. "I assumed you would have the good sense to die in the woods." "I am hard to kill," Kael said. His voice carried without shouting. "And I brought my own second." He stepped back. He left Nyra standing alone in the front. The crowd gasped. Was he offering her up? Was this a surrender? Grayson laughed. "The king offers the sacrifice. Finally, wisdom returns to the throne." "Look closer," Kael said softly. Grayson narrowed his eyes. He saw the ring on Nyra's thumb. The color drained from the elder's face. The crowd saw it too. Murmurs erupted, growing into a chaotic shout. The king's signet. It was a declaration of marriage. A declaration of shared rule. By the ancient laws, Nyra wasn't just under his protection. She was his equal. "This is blasphemy!" Grayson shrieked, pointing a shaking finger. "She is an abomination. A defect. You crown a mute dog?" Nyra took a step forward. The seal in her mind was vibrating so hard her teeth ached. The black wall was cracking. Light, blinding, golden light, was bleeding through the fissures. "I am not mute," Nyra said. Her voice wasn't loud. But it echoed. It resonated with a strange, harmonic distortion that made the glass in the spectator boxes rattle. Grayson took a step back. "Seize her! Kill her before she infects us all!" The executioners charged. 12 of them. 12 spears tipped with poison. Kael didn't move. He stood with his arms crossed, watching. He was waiting. Nyra didn't run. She didn't flinch. She watched the steel tips coming toward her chest, and for the first time in her life, she didn't see death. She saw geometry. She saw time slowing down. She closed her eyes and reached for the lock on her soul. Open. Chapter 21, The Golden Singularity. The first spear shattered before it touched her skin. It hit a wall of invisible force 3 inches from her chest. The wood splintered. The silver tip disintegrated into dust. The executioner stumbled back, his eyes wide with confusion. He tried to strike again. Nyra opened her eyes. They were no longer brown. They were no longer just gold. They were white. Pure, blinding, starfire white. The seal broke. It didn't just crack. It detonated. The explosion was silent, but the shockwave flattened the first row of executioners. They were thrown backward as if hit by a bomb, their bodies ragdolling across the sand. The ground beneath Nyra's feet liquefied. The stone melted into glass. A pillar of light erupted from her body, shooting straight up into the sky, piercing the clouds. The crowd screamed. They covered their eyes. The energy radiating from the small girl in the center of the arena was heavier than gravity. It forced alpha wolves to their knees. It made the air taste like copper and ozone. Nyra floated. Her feet left the ground. Her hair whipped around her face, defying the wind, glowing with the same ethereal light. She wasn't shifting into a wolf. She was shifting into something older. Apex, Grayson whispered, falling to the sand, shielding his face. Goddess, help us. She is a true apex. The executioners who could still stand hesitated. They looked at Grayson for orders, but the elder was paralyzed by the realization of his own doom. Kill her! Grayson screamed, his voice cracking. If she fully turns, she will destroy the mountain. One guard, braver or more stupid than the rest, threw his spear. It flew true, aimed right at Nyra's exposed throat. Kael moved. He didn't intercept the spear. He didn't need to. Nyra caught it. She didn't use her hands. The spear stopped in midair, caught in her telekinetic grip. She turned her head slowly. She looked at the guard. With a flick of her mind, she reversed the spear. It flew back. Faster. Harder. It pinned the guard to the arena wall by his shoulder. He screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the humming vibration rising from Nyra's skin. She looked at Kael. He was smiling. A savage, proud, terrifying smile. Burn them, Kael said. Nyra let go. The light consumed her. The human form dissolved. Bones rearranged. Muscle expanded. Fur erupted, not brown or gray, but white. White as the moon. White as the end of the world. A wolf the size of a warhorse landed on the obsidian glass of the arena floor. She threw back her massive head and let out a howl that shattered every window in the fortress. The hunt was on. Chapter 22, The Breaking of the Glass. Grayson screamed commands that went unanswered. The executioners were not soldiers. They were bullies with sticks, and they were staring at a deity wrapped in fur. Nyra did not attack immediately. She prowled. The obsidian glass of the arena floor clicked under her massive claws. She was a white storm cloud confined to the shape of a wolf, her fur radiating a bioluminescent glow that made the midday sun look dim. She looked at the High Elder, and in her eyes, there was no mercy. There was only the cold mathematics of survival. Kael shifted. The sound was a wet tear of fabric and flesh. The black wolf emerged, a shadow beast of muscle and darkness. He was huge, a creature of nightmares, but beside Nyra, he looked like a moon orbiting a planet. They moved in unison. Twin disasters. Grayson panicked. He pulled a hidden lever on the podium. Vents in the arena floor hissed open. Green gas spewed out. Wolfsbane vapor. Concentrated. Lethal. The crowd gasped, scrambling back as the toxic cloud rolled toward the center. Kael roared, the sound choked off as the gas hit his lungs. He stumbled. His black fur bristled as his nervous system began to shut down. The poison was designed to drop an army. Nyra did not stumble. She inhaled the gas. Instead of choking, her white fur flared brighter. Her apex physiology didn't just filter the poison, it metabolized it. She turned the toxicity into fuel. With a snarl that vibrated in the marrow of every spectator, she unleashed a shockwave of pure wind. The gas dispersed instantly, blown back into the stands, back into the faces of the council members who had authorized it. Nyra lunged. She crossed the arena in a single bound. Grayson turned to run, but he was too slow. Her jaws clamped around his torso. She didn't bite down. She threw him. He soared through the air, crashing into the stone wall of the royal box. He slid down, broken, defeated, alive only to witness his failure. Kael recovered. He shook his massive head, clearing the haze. He looked at Nyra. The air between them shimmered. The bond was no longer a thread. It was a riptide. It was time. Kael approached her. He didn't bow. He rubbed his muzzle against her neck, an intimate, possessive gesture in front of 5,000 witnesses. He nipped at the sensitive skin over her jugular. The crowd went deathly silent. They knew the legend. They knew the queens died. Kael bit down. He marked her. The reaction was catastrophic. A sphere of golden energy expanded from their joined bodies. It cracked the arena walls. It shattered the remaining windows. It should have incinerated Nyra. It should have turned her veins to ash. Instead, she absorbed it. She glowed like a supernova, taking the infinite energy of the king's soul and anchoring it into the earth. The curse slammed into her apex core and shattered into a million harmless sparks. She didn't burn. She ascended. Chapter 23, The Knee of the World. The light faded, leaving spots dancing in the eyes of the onlookers. In the center of the arena, the two wolves were gone. Two humans stood in the wreckage of the floor, naked, covered in dust, and alive. Kael gasped, falling to his knees, his hands frantically searching Nyra's skin. He looked for burns. He looked for the gray pallor of death that had taken Seraphina and Alara. He found only warm, flushed skin. Nyra stood tall. The mark on her neck was fresh, a crescent of red that was already healing, sealing itself into a silver scar. She felt heavy, grounded, but limitless. The silence in her head was gone, replaced by the steady, comforting thrum of Kael's heartbeat. "You're alive," Kael rasped, his voice thick with wonder. He touched her face as if she were a hallucination. "The fire, it didn't take you." "I am the fire," Nyra whispered. She looked up at the stands. Thousands of faces stared back. Fear mingled with awe. They had watched their laws crumble. They had watched a runt swallow a curse that had plagued the throne for centuries. A single guard in the front row dropped to one knee. He bowed his head low, exposing his neck. Then another. Then a councilman. Like a ripple moving through water, the submission spread. The silence broke, replaced by the rustle of fabric and the thud of knees hitting stone. The hostility evaporated, burned away by the display of raw, undeniable power. Even the members of the High Council, those who hadn't fled the gas, prostrated themselves. They weren't bowing to Kael. They were bowing to the White Wolf. Kael stood up. He grabbed a cloak from a stunned attendant and wrapped it around Nyra's shoulders. He didn't cover her to hide her shame, he covered her to hoard her brilliance. He turned to the crowd. His golden eyes swept over the sea of bowed heads. "The old laws are dead," Kael announced. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of a gavel strike. "Any who wish to challenge the queen may step into the ring now." No one moved. Even the wind seemed afraid to interrupt. Grayson, broken and bleeding in the royal box, let out a weak groan. Kael didn't look at him. Grayson was history. He was a footnote in the story of Nyra's ascension. Kael took her hand. He interlaced their fingers, the signet ring on her thumb clicking against his knuckles. "Let's go home," he said. Nyra looked at the exit. She didn't look at the ground. She looked at the horizon. Yes, she said. We have a kingdom to rebuild. Chapter 24, The Coronation of Self. The throne room was different. The shadows were gone. Nyra had ordered the heavy velvet drapes torn down. Sunlight flooded the space, illuminating the dust motes and the intricate carvings on the high ceiling. It was no longer a fortress of ghosts. It was a house of the living. She stood before the obsidian throne. It was a massive, uncomfortable chair cut from volcanic rock, designed to remind the sitter that power was a burden. Kael stood beside it. He held the crown of the moon in his hands. It was a delicate thing, woven from silver and moonstone, far lighter than the iron band he wore. This belonged to my mother, Kael said softly. And hers before her. It has not been worn in 3 generations. Nyra touched the cold metal. I don't need a crown to lead them, Kael. They saw what I am. I know, he replied. He stepped closer. This isn't for them. This is for you. A reminder that you didn't just survive the mud. You conquered the mountain. He lifted the crown. He didn't rush. He savored the moment, his eyes tracing the line of her jaw, the curve of her lips. The hunger was still there, but the desperation was gone. The curse was broken. They had time. They had forever. He placed the silver circlet on her head. Long may she reign, he whispered, leaning in to kiss her forehead. Nyra turned to sit. She hesitated. She looked at the massive throne, then at the smaller consort chair beside it. She grabbed the heavy iron throne and dragged it to the center. Then she grabbed the consort chair and placed it directly next to it, angling them so they touched. We rule together, she said. Or we don't rule at all. Kael smiled. It was a genuine smile, one that reached his eyes and stayed there. He sat down. Nyra sat beside him. She took his hand. The doors to the throne room opened. The new council, younger wolves, chosen for merit, not bloodline, waited in the antechamber. Send them in, Nyra commanded. Her voice was steady. It was the voice of a woman who had walked through hell and decided to redecorate. Epilogue, the footprint. The training pits were empty. Nyra stood at the edge of the mud. It still smelled of copper and old sweat, but the terror was gone. It was just dirt. The pack, her old pack, stood at a distance. The boys who had thrown stones were men now, and they couldn't meet her eyes. They trembled. They waited for punishment. They waited for the queen to burn them for their sins. Nyra looked at the spot where she used to scrub the floor until her fingers bled. She remembered the girl who wished she was invisible. She didn't hate that girl. She pitied her. But she didn't know her anymore. She turned around. Kael was waiting by the car, leaning against the door, watching her with that intense, golden focus that made the rest of the world blur. She walked toward him. She didn't look back at the pack. She didn't offer forgiveness, and she didn't offer cruelty. She gave them something worse. She gave them her indifference. Nyra got into the car. The engine roared. As they drove away, leaving the mud pits behind for the last time, she didn't check the rearview mirror. There was nothing back there worth seeing.